I'll take you to the asylum and drop you off. I'll never have to deal with you again.
That is messed up. Hey guys, welcome back. If you are new here, hi, my name is Shayna. In my little corner of the internet, we talk about spooky history of all kinds. If that sounds like something you're interested in, be sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell because I am here for you on Wednesdays. Happy Halloween! I have really enjoyed being with you guys this past week. It's been a very fun and spooky week. I've got a long story for you guys today, so I'm really excited about it. So let's go on and dive in. Today we're going to be talking about Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. A long time ago, before asylums, a lot of people who were mentally ill were hidden away. Families would hide their mentally ill in secret rooms, sheds, or even just holes in the ground. Out of sight, out of mind. Really sad. What was worse is that if no one was able to take care of the person who was mentally ill, they would lock them away in prisons and be treated as criminals. They were stripped of their clothes and chained to the walls. They couldn't use restrooms and couldn't clean themselves at all. Back in the day, no one really studied people who had mental illness, so everyone just thought that there was no cure for something like that. People believed that it was best to just lock them away and forget about them altogether. But in the 1800s, people started to learn more about mental illness, what they were caused by, and tried to learn how to treat them. Things really started to look up because of a woman named Dorothea Dix. Growing up, Dorothea's father was an abusive alcoholic, and her mother suffered from a severe mental illness. So Dorothea was stuck raising her twin brothers. She was a very smart and bright woman, and she believed that the women should get as good as an education as the men do. So when she was just 15, she helped open up a private school for girls. But in 1841, she went and visited a jail in Cambridge and saw how the mentally ill were being treated. She described that they were left chained to the walls and naked. They had no ventilation and no heat, even in the middle of the winter. After witnessing this, Dorothea turned to the public and told them everything that she had witnessed. This is really what forced the hand of the lawmakers to improve the conditions, which would lead to the first state hospital that opened in 1848. Now, during Dorothea's career, she had worked closely with a popular, well-respected surgeon, and his name was Dr. Thomas Story Kirkbride. Dr. Kirkbride was a medical doctor that designed facilities specifically for the mentally ill. His designs were called the Kirkbride Plan, and the whole design for these buildings were described as a humane building method. He believed that the environment of the facility is what would be the most effective way to treat the mentally ill patients. He also believed that the patients should have more freedom and not be locked away, and that they needed to have some control of their day and have enough activities that would help stimulate their minds. Now, this would include having tons of access to fresh air and sunshine. Actually sounds kind of nice. And he theorized that if all of these things were to take place, that he would be able to cure mentally ill patients. Kirkbride managed to convince the hospital governors to fund his work and allow him to build a new facility using the Kirkbride Plan. His building designs included long hallways, 12-foot ceilings, and tall windows, as well as cross ventilation to let the natural breeze in. Now, this design really caught on, and more than 300 facilities in North America started using this plan as well. And one of these facilities was called the Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum that is in West Virginia. Now, these facilities really wanted to focus on beauty, nature, and self-sufficiency. The wings of the facility were designed in a staggering formation. Now, this helped give each space plenty of natural light and fresh air. It was planned for each patient to have their own room and privacy. Now, the goal was really for the asylum to feel more like home. Honestly, to me, it sounds like a pretty good plan. My opinion. Good on paper anyways. Now, from the outside world, it looks more like a fancy boarding school than a hospital. And the building is located in a very deserted area. So there's plenty of land and had extensive lawns and very colorful gardens. It was made to be completely self-sustaining. It reminds me of the Waverly Hills Sanatorium, which was a hospital area that was so big and had so many buildings that it had its own zip code. I was actually the second second video I ever made on my channel. If you want to check it out and you haven't seen it yet, I'll link it here for you, but it was a really interesting story. Now, construction for this hospital would start in 1858. People that really built this building were mainly prisoners and slave laborers. Very different times back then. Later, they would bring in expert stonemasons from Germany to help with the more ornate aspects of the facility. Unfortunately, though, the Civil War broke out in 1861, and this forced all work that wasn't related to the war to stop. Now, on June 30th at 5 a.m., Union soldiers entered from the north and they searched the town Weston, which is where the facility was located near, looking for any Confederate sympathizers. But they had ulterior motives. They were really interested in robbing the Weston branch of the Exchange Bank of Virginia. A captain and 2 of his armed guards were able to steal $27,000 in gold from the vault, which in today's money was $833,000. It's a lot of money. Part of the gold was to help build the asylum. This plus the war really hindered the building plans for the hospital. The asylum was still in the early stages of construction, but the wing that was furthest south was fully completed. So the Union soldiers decided that they were going to turn the partially completed asylum into what was called Camp Tyler. And this is what established the city as a major military post. But in 1862 and again in 1863, Confederate soldiers raided the asylum, which would force out the Union soldiers. Now, during one of their raids, they stole over $5,000 in gold, as well as all of the food and clothing from the southern wing that was reserved for the future patients. After the war, one of the first priorities was to finish up the asylum and get it opened. It's been renamed to the West Virginia Hospital for the Insane. Then it was changed again to the Weston State Hospital. The construction would last for several years, but the hospital started taking patients in October of 1864. The facility was designed to house 250 patients, and they would get their own rooms. And just as planned, the asylum had everything that they needed in order to be self-sustaining. It had a vegetable garden, a working farm, dairy cows, an ice plant, a gas well, and also a cemetery. They even had their clothes and furniture locally made. So it appeared as if everything was going according to plan and they had everything they needed. Now, one of the activities for the patients were to help out in one of these areas that I just mentioned, and it would help them learn a new trade. Now, there was a variety of reasons as to why patients were admitted into the hospital. It started out for people who had a feebleness of intellect, ingestion of brain, and grief-stricken in novel reading. Not exactly sure what that means. Then family members would start leaving patients at the hospital for reasons like laziness, menstrual derangement, superstition, overstudy of religion, and tuberculosis. That is pretty crazy. Now, the first patient that was admitted was a housewife who was left there by her husband, and the reasoning was because of domestic trouble. Apparently, anyone and everyone could admit whoever they wanted for whatever reason. Very sad, strange situation. Now, many of the patients that were admitted didn't show any sign of mental illness, but this would change during their stay at the asylum. This asylum was honestly massive. When construction was completed, the total cost was $725,000, which was $300,000 over budget. This place was 1,295 feet long with 2.5 miles of hallways. The walls themselves were 2.5 feet thick, which made the rooms nearly soundproof. In 1881 is when the facility had officially opened. There was a massive wave of patients flooding the facility. At the time, doctors were diagnosing mentally illnesses like crazy. The number of patients at the asylum reached 750, which is 3 times the limit. Employees couldn't keep up. What was supposed to be a peaceful environment for patients turned into complete and utter chaos. Instead of each patient having their own rooms, they would share cots or just sleep on the floor. Some patients were born and died in the asylum, which means they spent their entire lives locked away from the world. But instead of focusing on treatment for the patients and to try to cure them, their main thing was trying to keep all of the patients locked locked away in their rooms. And funding for the hospital would continue to severely decline over the years, which made the living condition even worse. Despite the lack of funding, they continued to add buildings, including a tuberculosis wing, which I'm honestly surprised by, because they shouldn't be taking patients who had tuberculosis, because that's not a mental illness, that is a physical illness. So that doesn't even make sense. As soon as the building would get finished, it would be filled with new incoming patients. By 1938, the asylum was 6 times over the capacity with 1,661 patients. Man. Now, get this, okay? It's crazy what they were admitting people for now. Some of these I get, but most of them I'm like,
Really? Really?
So they were admitting new patients with symptoms of alcohol and drug abuse, epilepsy, mental defects, asthma, dementia, egotism, bad whiskey, indigestion, loss of arm, change of life, doubt about mother's ancestors, that's a good one, fits, childbirth, disappointed love, death of sons in war, snuff eating, desertion of a husband. Come on. Okay, so if your husband just gets tired of you one day,
Is he just gonna threaten you? I'll take you to the asylum and drop you off. I'll never have to deal with you again.
that is messed up. John, don't get any ideas, okay? I would legit run away if my husband just thought I was just too crazy and he just needed me to go into an asylum. Oh my word. Now at this point, employees had completely lost control over the patients and they could no longer keep them confined in their rooms. They were outnumbered, essentially. They didn't have as many workers. I don't know why they couldn't just turn people away. You know what I mean? I don't get it. Now what makes it worse is that there was only enough food grown on the property to feed about 300 people. And because of this, many of the patients suffered from malnutrition. Orderlies didn't have enough time to keep the patients in facilities clean. Within a few years, the amount of patients in the facility went up to 2,400. That is nearly 10 times the limit allowed. More auxiliary buildings were built to meet the demand. And this included a kitchen, a dining area, a laundry facility, storage, and forensics. Most patients were forced to sleep on floors in rooms that were freezing cold. And since the staff couldn't keep the facilities clean, it got so dirty that toxic mold started growing on the walls. There was buildup of grime on the windows, which would block out most of the natural light that was meant to come in to help treat the patients. And when the patients would complain or bother the staff would just lock them away in solitary confinement. And if they still don't obey, then they would be chained to the walls. Some of the patients were left in chains for months at a time. Not much better than the prison they were being sent to. Possibly even worse. Staff would lock patients in what was called a Utica crib, and these were long, narrow boxes that were about 15 to 30 inches high that had these open slots at the tops and along the sides. And patients would be locked in a crib for hours or even days at a time. And then they had these restraint chairs that were used to control extremely violent patients. They were slightly reclined back, and it would force the patient to sit perfectly upright. And the plan of rehabilitating these patients had completely fallen apart, obviously. The asylum had these humane therapies that they would have the patients do in order to treat them. Very different times back then, just saying. So they had what was called a hydrotherapy. They would immerse the patients in waters for hours or even days at a time. Depending on what they were being treated for, the water was either kept really hot or really cold. Another treatment was bloodletting. Now this is pretty messed up. This was done in ancient Egyptian times, and it was believed to purge women of bad humors. Why do women always get the worst? I mean, come on. They would sever the large veins and arteries to drain the patient's blood, or they would use this very scary looking bloodletting tool that had these steel blades called a scarificator. Doctors at the time believed that it was a good thing to cause the patients to have seizures. They made this happen by administering high doses of chemicals like metrazil. I think that's how you pronounce it. Metrazil. Unfortunately, after the patients took this metrazil, they would experience panic and terror before having the seizure. And there were more tortures that these poor people had to endure, which included the awful lobotomy. And as you can imagine, that between all of these therapies and overcrowding, there were a ton of deaths. And patients would become very violent and start attacking orderlies and nurses and doctors. They would even attack each other. Many of the patients would commit murders and assaults. In 1987, 2 patients attacked one other patient, and it's pretty brutal. If you want to skip a couple seconds, I don't blame you. But they tied a bedsheet around the patient's neck and strangled him, then proceeded to crush his skull with a metal bedpost. Very sad. Employees would report being attacked while working. Female staff members were assaulted by patients many times. I'm not going to say the R word because I don't want YouTube to be mad at me, but they were assaulted is what we're going to call it. One evening there was a nurse that was on duty and she went missing. Well, the staff assumed that she just quit and left because that happened a lot. It was just so chaotic. It was hard to keep people working there. But 2 months later, they ended up finding the nurse's body at the bottom of the abandoned staircase. It's so crazy what all has happened in this place. It's so sad. In 1960, a medical center and morgue were added to the asylum in order to handle the increase in deaths. This asylum has 3 cemeteries on the property. That's a lot. Then finally, in 1994, the asylum was forced to close and would be abandoned. Now, right now, I know the asylum is open for tours, so people can go and learn about the history and even go and ghost hunt if they want. Rumors that the asylum was haunted started decades before it even closed its doors. Over 2,000 patients were buried in the asylum cemeteries, but that's not all that died in the asylum, because there were more that had died, but they were claimed by their family and buried somewhere else. People have reported unusual sounds and strange shadows. Multiple employees would only stay on the job for a few days and then quit because of the hauntings. I don't blame them. People visiting and the staff would see gurneys rolling through the hallways, ghostly figures lurking in the stairways, balls of light will float in and out of the patient's rooms, spirits dressed in white would even watch them while they slept. Like the patients, I mean, while it was open. Super creepy. One doctor that worked there stated that a spirit followed her home and never stopped haunting her. Now, the most haunted area is Ward 2 on the 2nd floor. Ghostly apparitions have been seen wandering in and out of rooms in that area. Anyone who sees these spirits are immediately overwhelmed by these feelings of rage and despair. Voices have been recorded by using EVP, which is an electronic voice phenomenon, and some have even captured ghosts saying, "Get out." Now, the part of the asylum that the soldiers took over is super haunted by the spirits of those soldiers. In the electroshock room, people will hear screaming, moaning, not good. And of course, people will hear banging sounds and door slamming. I feel like that's common in any haunting, honestly. Seems like anyways. Oftentimes, visitors will be overcome by these strange feelings that they know don't belong to them. There's this one patient, her name was Ruth, and she's really known to haunt the halls of the asylum. And while she was alive, she really hated men. So oftentimes, if a man wanders in the halls, Ruth is known to violently shove them up against a wall. And other times, people will hear this creepy whistling sound in the nearby rooms. That would honestly terrify me, just saying. These people went through so much. I honestly couldn't imagine. People went into the asylum that weren't mentally ill, but just from being there caused them to become mentally ill. And to me, that's truly heartbreaking. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and the last 7 days that we spent together enjoying this Halloweek. I hope you guys have a great, happy Halloween. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and notification bell if you enjoy learning about spooky history. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye!